Yes, sir.
This is not
the honored guest.
Oh,
from Minnesota, where it's also probably warmer than
right. I'm from Minnesota. It's warm. I wanted to ask you: do you think that our political conversation in America permanently needs to have an us and them view of somebody who's accused of a crime? Or can we ever move it in the direction of this could be your cousin that got arrested? And if we can move it that way, how would we go about doing that? Or, you know, sometimes I think you just need to have some image of the juvenile super predator or something to scare people so they'll vote for somebody. And maybe that's built into our system now, but I hope it's not.
Well, it's a question that goes to the fundamental nature, fundamental human nature, the fundamental dichotomy, law and justice, crime and punishment, the stealing of the loaf of bread. Crime is among the most emotional issues that, you know, humans talk about, and one of the most emotional issues that touches on law and politics. And when crime occurs to people, people get emotional about it. It hits that visceral thing. And as a nation, you know, there was this period in the 1950s and 60s where the courts sort of led us out of the dark ages of a new interpretation of the Constitution. Congress followed to a certain extent. We saw it, you know, manifestation of that in the Voting Rights Act. We saw it in some other manifestations. And then, you know, I think in 2013, we are still as a nation dealing a generation later, 2 generations later, with, you know, this great crime wave in the 1970s and early 1980s. And the reaction to that, the overreaction to that, we're still dealing with today. We're dealing with the Reagan-era federal laws, and we're dealing with the over-criminalization of drug laws, the failed war on drugs. The perceptions that people have that being tough on crime is necessarily just is something that's very deeply ingrained. The media, and I can't speak for every media organization, at the level that I deal with, folks want to get beyond the dichotomy, right? They want to look beyond it. They want to be, if not looking at things from a different angle, at least offering readers or news consumers a different take on it. So it's not the same old, you know, issue of black and white. It's very, very hard to do because you're asking people, and this is one of the biggest challenges I have, is you're asking people to understand constitutional law, the rule of law, the Bill of Rights in a way that is hard for people to understand. It's hard for people to understand the tensions between, you know, the First Amendment and the Sixth Amendment, for example. It's hard for people to understand how vital it is to have the right of counsel and how diminished we are when we deprive it to a certain group of people. You know, people look at the Trayvon Martin case as a perfect example of that. You know, that gets a lot of coverage. I've been doing this for 16 years now. 10 times a year there's a case that's manifestly unjust, that's a national case. And, you know, the divide is a racial divide, it's a political divide, in some ways it's an economic divide. It's going to be very, very hard. That's why, what I said in my remarks, the virtue of what you guys do, and one of the virtues of it, is that you're looking at this divide in a new way. You're saying, you know what, we're not going to necessarily get help from Congress, we're not necessarily going to get help from our state lawmakers who want to be able to campaign on, you know, being tough on crime. We've got to sort of do it ourselves, and we've got to change the way people perceive what we do so that we don't just help our clients, but that we change the perceptions that people have of public defenders, which is the point that our friend from Florida was trying to make. It's a weaselly answer because I don't know that there is an answer. In a perfect world, people would be educated and people would understand that whatever the outcome of a particular case, the whole nation loses when lawmakers and judges and politicians and prosecutors and police act out against defendants because they're accused of a crime. It's just a story that's hard to tell. I knew that would shut everyone up.
I wish everybody's cousin would get arrested for something.
Well, and that's the thing. You know, that's the thing is that, you know, the other thing we should talk about, I'm sorry, I'll get to you in a second. The other thing to talk about is I came onto the scene as a reporter around the time that the victims' rights movement began. And, you know, my first big trial that I covered was the Oklahoma City bombing trial, where the victims were a huge part of it. They were politicized. And that interjection of victims' rights into the equation, into the mix between defendant and lawyer and prosecutor and judge, has had enormous impacts. There is no similar lobby for defendants, and I don't think there ever will be. I think America is still trying to deal with the impact of the victims' rights movement, which is very politicized and which still has a lot of power in state capitals and so forth. You know, you'd like to have a group that would say, you know, we're going to stand up nationally for the rights of these people, and so far it hasn't really happened on a national level. Yes?
Pretty much you guys covered what I was going to say, Andrea.
And it's basically a shame, and it's just awful that a lot of times our issues with our indigent defendants of, well, many colors, but mostly African American, their issues only get addressed when somebody from a different socioeconomic position gets in the same cell. And that we've seen it over and over and over again. And it's a shame that the way things go now, even with the media, is that the change, in other words, change for our clients only comes by changing the face.
Right.
Like heroin now is some sympathetic drug that poor actors use, and it's in another community. Maybe that'll get addressed now, but maybe not in Baltimore. But I think that that's just a sad commentary on just the way we are. And that's, I guess, why we're together, to try to figure out how to get around that. But right now, that's when the media jumps on somebody that doesn't fit the racial profile or the profile that you're used to of a criminal. That's when change happens. That's when people go, oh, there's a constitution. That's just a comment.
Yeah, no, I agree with it. I mean, I keep thinking, and I haven't written this, I don't know how you write it, but I mean, just think, you don't have to even talk about it, how the Martin-Zimmerman confrontation would have been differently covered, perhaps differently resolved, had it gone the other way, right? And had Trayvon Martin shot George Zimmerman. I think it would have been profoundly different on just about every level. And I think that people who know anything about the criminal justice system, it would be hard to find people who would disagree with that. Whatever the outcome would be, I think it would be hard for people to disagree with that. It's a hard piece to write. You know, the other thing that I think that we're confronted with if we're talking about racial justice is, you know, in the comments I mentioned that, you know, the American optimism and the American notion of self, you know, the service industry. Another profoundly American thing is denial, right? Denial about the things that are hard to face. And one of the big areas of national denial right now is you know, the racial disparity that exists. And it doesn't just exist in sentencing, it doesn't just exist in the capital cases that I cover, it exists profoundly in what you guys do. And, you know, if the racial numbers were different, I think the response would be different from politicians. That's awful. It's un-American in a sense, but it's also very, very American in a sense. And one of the things that I try to do, one of the things that some other journalists I know try to do, is we try to just highlight that. That's all you can do, because you know, if you want to say it, that there's a great deal of people in this country who just turn off their ears and turn off their eyes when you raise that issue. They don't want to hear about it. They don't want to hear about it because it would require them to confront some very hard choices and to confront the ramifications of some hard choices that they've already made. Yes, sir.
Do you have any thoughts about the role of social media and how it can assist in changing the perception of our work and ourselves?
I think that social media, the questions about social media, it's a huge opportunity for you folks, it seems to me, because what it does is it takes away the filter of the editor in New York, or the editor in Washington, or the editor anywhere to disseminate information. And what it does is it's you know, it's like, what's the show, I'm blanking on it, where people, you know, it's like the talent show and people call in to vote for, you know, the favorite.
American Idol.
Thank you. I'm, you know, I'm more of a Jersey Shore guy. But I mean, you know, what social media does is it gets your story out. And if your story is interesting and decent, your story is going to get play, your story is going to get traction, even if the New York Times wouldn't have run it, even if some editor somewhere doesn't think it's a big deal, even if a journalist like me isn't necessarily interested in it. So I think it's a huge opportunity, and that's why I say the opportunity that you all have for sharing some of your stuff to try to change some of the perceptions so you can generate more support, financial and otherwise, can come from social media, can come from the local story that gets put on Facebook. And I, just as an aside, one of the rules that I have, I'm big on Twitter. I'm sort of less on Facebook anymore. I'm sort of use Facebook for just my friends, like the way it was meant to be. And I have many fewer friends than I used to have. But I'm on Twitter all the time. And one of the things I like to do on Twitter, and Twitter is different for everyone, is I try to find stories that are being underreported, stories on the law beat. And I try to use whatever small forum I have on Twitter to share those stories and to say, this is an interesting story, you should read this. Sometimes it works. Sometimes I will tweet something and it'll get retweeted 50 times by other journalists and by other policy people, and I feel like I've done some good. I feel like I've been true to my beat of the law, and I've educated myself and the people who are following me about something that I think is worthy of it. What you folks want to do, if you can, and if you have the time and the ability, is to bring those stories to the attention of people like me so that it can then be passed along. If you've ever been involved, has anyone had a story or a client or an issue with the media where it's gone viral? It just like spreads. It's an unbelievable experience to write something or to have something that you care about and then see it spread across the world in a matter of minutes or hours. It's quite a thing, and it's available to you folks if you can somehow get your stories out. And I think, honestly, there's so many outlets now that are looking for independent stories, original stories, under the radar stories, that you guys have more opportunities than you did 10 years ago or 15 years ago when your options were the local television stations, right, or the two local newspapers. So now there's fewer newspapers, but there's a million venues online for you to get your stuff across. And of course, there are many, many blogs, as you guys know, that focus on this area of the law. So yeah, I'm optimistic about it, but I think what it does is it should create more incentive for you folks to figure out ways to get those local people. Yes?